Your expenses are such a critical piece of retirement planning. Yet most of us just focus on how much money we have saved. Why is that? Why do we become fixated on our total portfolio and spend hours and hours throughout the year sort of staring a hole through our computer screens at what we're invested in every day or should have been invested in or regrets over a few things we wish we hadn't invested in? That answer is easy because those numbers are cleanly served to you on a monthly or even daily basis whenever you want it, right? You can easily pull up your account, you can see your total value, easy peasy. But what if I asked you, how much do you spend every month? Silence, right? Most people don't know that, and you'd be in good company. They don't know the answer to that question. If you find yourself to be one of those people, there are lots of us out there, but this video might be just what you need to find an easy way to create a realistic retirement budget in a lot less time. All right, so in my 27 years of financial planning, I would break most people into three categories. Over here, we've got the small percentage of people who really love crunching numbers, watching what they spend, looking for deals, bragging to their friends about how much they didn't spend versus how much they did. Doing planning for these folks is far easier than most. Their attention to detail, cost-cutting abilities, and financial discipline are removing many bad variables from their lives. On the other side of the scale, though, are the ones who make me really nervous to plan for. They have no idea where their money is going. They spend little time even thinking or caring about it. Oftentimes, it's not because they're lazy or unintelligent about this topic, it's that they literally don't care. A lot of times it's because they have great jobs, high incomes. So there's never really been a reason for them to pay close attention. But when they shift into retirement mode, unless they've saved a bundle to provide some sort of cushion, they're in for a bumpy ride. So these folks cause me concern. Now, for the rest of us, the vast majority of us right out there, that right here in the middle group, I would say, if you're in this group, you're probably saying things to yourself like, hey, I can tell you the most of the big ticket items that I bought this month, or I can probably give you a good estimate of what I spent last month as well, but I probably can't tell you with any certainty how much I average each month or even what I spend all year long. Well, guess what? Everybody in that middle group, we got you covered. Remember, as an advisor, it's our responsibility to help make your life easier. And since the vast majority of clients that we help walk into retirement have sort of a blurry view of what their expenses are, we have cheats or hacks to help you find what we would call ranges. Instead of knowing the exact dollars like some of those people over there on that side, ranges are the next best thing when it comes to planning. It's important to give some definition to these ranges, though. As you can see in this example, how we are showing someone that they're on pace to possibly have between 4 million or 5.5 million by the time they hit their retirement age. But we're also showing them that their projected spending could lead them down a dangerous path that leaves them running out of money way before their life expectancy. But since we talked to this client about building in some ranges to his expenses, he can get a sense for the power of visualizing his retirement, and he can begin seeing the power that he has by controlling these types of variables. For example, what if he takes down his spending to the lower end of the range he defined? Immediately, he sees that long-term graph suddenly reverse its trend and begin pointing upward, meaning that just by dropping the expenses down to the lower part of that range, he has made a meaningful difference in his financial future, and he can also see what that does for his long-term probability of success. I've asked one of my partners here, Kirk Lunger at Stonehouse, to join me to talk about how much he works with people to get them set for retirement without going through a painfully long budgeting process. I think you'll see that Kirk loves to streamline this thing for his clients as much as he can, while still finding that important information that he needs in order to build them realistic expectations. Okay, Kirk. So thank you for coming in today. I know we're always busy. You're always a very busy guy. I know you work with a lot of folks. We just talked about creating a budget. Before I had you on camera, I was talking to our viewers about, showed them an illustration of what we do in our financial planning software, of how we do work with these folks in these ranges instead of people that typically, those rare occasions where people know to the dollar what they spend every month. Most everybody falls in that wide category, right? So you're really good at helping people kind of transition from, I have no idea what those numbers are, to kind of zooming into at least a range. And so let's talk about the importance of creating a budget.
Yeah, the main starting point for most folks, to your point, when they come in and say, I really don't know what I spend, is just trying to understand where your money goes. Right. So part of that process for us can just be 5 to 10 minutes, sometimes a half an hour at most, going through a discussion on what does their monthly income look like today. So taking a look at what their paycheck is, backing into that paycheck, whether it's monthly, biweekly, whatever it may be, and kind of, do you save any money in that period of time? Right. Or is most of that going out to expenses? And then if so, what do those expenses look like? So we have fixed expenses, there's variable costs. And then trying to get a handle on kind of what that lifestyle looks like. And that's really where I would say budgeting is most important for, is it could really be done at any stage of life, but it's even more important as we approach retirement, because when we're giving up that weekly paycheck, monthly paycheck, whatever it may be, and now using our nest egg, well, it's not an endless supply of water. Right. So we have to make sure that we don't run it dry.
That's right. And I said that in the beginning, it's usually the people that have great income levels that are like, they're not paying attention to the nickels and dimes. Well, when you go onto more of a fixed kind of an income in retirement, usually, unless you've saved up a whopping amount of money, those nickels and dimes really matter. Right? More than they did when you were in the high earning years.
Right. And generally speaking, even if you've amassed a large nest egg, you still want to make sure it lasts and do all the things that you want it to accomplish. So for the most part, you probably didn't get there by happenstance without going through a regimented savings routine and working towards that goal. So from a budgeting perspective, it's the same thing. You don't have to run a marathon, so to speak, just to try and get a handle on, well, where does that income go through? Right. You don't have to sign up for a super elaborate software that you plug all of your data into. It can be as simple as going through a pen and paper and writing everything down and tracking it. So it's one thing to put a budget in place. It's then another to actually run the analysis and what were the actual numbers month in and month out. And a lot of times for folks, that's what I'll call their trial period. Kick the tires while you're working, preferably, a year, 3 years, 5 years in advance, to say, what expenses do we have today that we won't going into retirement? What might we pick up that is already being deducted, like healthcare in our current paycheck, and to try and really lock in on this range of spending that we live today.
Yeah. So the exercise of whether you create a budget or not, like how many times people come into us and say, like, you're like, what's the first step? And if you said, I need you to create a detailed budget, they're like, oh, they just melt into the sea, right? And most of the times that they're not coming back, or at least not coming back with that homework done. So you ease into it. So what are like the first steps that you do to sort of help them start wide at least and narrow it down?
Yeah. So what we usually start with is, what is your current take-home pay? And so as part of that, we would kind of go through that analysis. We might even look at your yearly tax return if you brought that in. It's not always a necessity, because most people will usually say, I get paid every 2 weeks and I make X dollars per month. Right. So we'll start with that for yourself, and then your spouse or significant other, if they're with you, to try and get at what is that monthly household income that's coming into you after taxes. From there, that's when we would start to take a deeper dive into the granular side of what each line item for that money goes to. And for most people, they'll know if, well, hey, I'm putting X amount either in my savings, or, some folks have kind of Christmas clubs at their banks and credit unions where they're allocating capital for at other times of the year. But for the most part, we're going to start with, what are you living off of today? What are you getting paid? What does overtime look like? So, do you have a side hustle? Do you pick up extra days when you're working? Because again, when you stop working, you're not doing those things. Or if you don't plan to, you don't want that to be a surprise down the road because you didn't budget properly. And now that range of spending maybe looks a little bit too tight.
Yeah.
And that's the scariest, Pete.
Yeah. So one of the things I always have an issue with, I feel like part of our job as an advisor is to bring the theoretical ideas in finance to reality, right? And so, and then you can set expectations much easier if they're very realistic expectations. I know you're a big fan of that. And we talk about, you mentioned before, a lot of our clients they believe they have simple lives, right? But maybe not. So how do you match reality with their expectations? Like, how do you bring everything in line? Yeah.
So that's where the holistic planning approach comes in, where we need to be looking at that retirement analysis that we call our e-money plan. That's the software we use. So that way we can really dial into what does that monthly budget look like and translate through the decades. Yeah. And so what we look at in terms of being realistic is, generally speaking, if someone comes in and talks about living a simpler financial life, but yet there are signs that we start to look at and say, well, for what it is you're living off of, you don't have enough money saved up to potentially have that for your entire lifetime. That's the thing we're trying to get ahead of. So they can be miscellaneous expenses that pop up, whether it's an unplanned health expense or, just a miscellaneous vet bill. It could be an annual vacation. So we see that oftentimes where folks will say, it's not like I travel first class and, sail across the world, but yet just those annual costs that you might work an extra shift or two of overtime, or, pick up some side work here and there. If you're retired and you're still spending that money, we need to make sure it's allocated. So it doesn't matter when it comes out in the year, whether it's just once a year or equally across all 12 months. The idea is really getting into that budget to say, this is the amount of expenses we think are going to come out every year. Right. So trying to build in a little bit of buffer for those unexpected costs. Because again, when you're working, it's easier to make adjustments. We cut back, we work a little bit more, and we smooth that out over a period of time. In retirement, it could be a phone call to you or me and saying, hey, I need a little bit extra this month. Yeah. Okay, no problem, until it's a problem.
Right. Yeah. And you have to match that, right, with sort of real changes. So if someone has a habit that's a bad habit, sometimes it's really, really hard for them to break it, whether they're working or they're retired. Yeah. So if somebody says, well, I'll just eat less, like that's not really realistic, right? Not flying first class, that's a realistic thing you can do, but just eating less, it's not probably going to work out. So you deal with a lot of wide ranges.
Yes.
Do me a favor, Kirk, let's back up and say, since we are talking to what I referred to as people in the middle, right, that kind of have a good idea, but not to the numbers to the exact amount, how do you start to, if I sit down with you today, how do you take me from, like, I know what I make every week to actually having a budget that I'm ready to go and rock in retirement, a range? Yeah. How do you do that?
So, that process will take shape over 1 to 2 meetings. That first meeting is going to be data gathering, like you just described, which is I know what my income is, I know what my savings are, I have all of that information of my fixed expenses, and I have a good handle on what those variable costs look like month to month. Generally speaking, then that next phase is going to be putting that into your retirement plan to show you the different variations of what if you spent maybe $500 a month more, $1,000 a month more, and then the opposite, because those dual impacts there can have big outcomes over long periods of time. For most folks there, an extra $500 or $1,000 when you're working is not going to seem overly significant in the grand scheme of things. However, in retirement, if you underestimated your monthly expenses by $500 to $1,000 a month in 15 to 20 years, that could have a monumental impact on how successful or not your plan is decades down the road. And so that's where, from a budgeting perspective, what I like to tell most people, let's keep it simple, stupid. The idea behind the KISS principle is really to go through the basics. Let's put pen to paper. Let's get these numbers out. And then a lot of times for clients, that's the homework I may give you, is this realistic? I can't answer that just in this meeting, because there are red flags. We can look for certain signs that we have. One, for most folks, is kind of an obvious one. If there's a lot of credit card debt, you might be living above your means month to month in there. Unexpected things do happen. We see that from time to time. That doesn't mean you're not outside the averages. It's just we need to have a plan in place to say, how are we going to get out of that?
Right.
The second thing we start to look for is then, in terms of being realistic, is making sure that when you're ready to call it a career, that your lifestyle looks what you're accustomed to, or at least what you're planning on in retirement.
Right, that's the key.
Yeah, I mean, unexpected changes, curveballs happen. That's life. So it's not like we can plan for everything, but starting a budget, even if it's just a basic one getting started, of knowing where your money goes, is the only true way to put yourself in a better financial position than where you are today.
Right. Yeah, when it's safe to say, right, that those hacks, those cheats, if you will, the back of the envelope calculations, as you always like to call them, they are much. Not doing that is sort of like playing the craps at Vegas, right?
Yep.
Like, I'll see what my retirement turns out to be, right?
Yep.
But just taking, I'm harping on this because I've seen so many people, my 27 years of doing this, that just freeze up about getting a budget.
Yep.
And because they're looking at these long sheets of like 60 entries that got to go through their checkbook over the last 6 months. And your ways are much easier to say, hey, in just a half hour,
right,
we can get a pretty good handle of roughly where you're spending. And do you think post-retirement, the day after you walk out of wherever you've been working your whole life, do you think it looks a lot different? If so, how?
Yep.
If not, great. Then we have an idea. We have a roadmap, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So ranges, as opposed to dialing down to the dollar for dollar. The
Correct.
ranges help us. They're not a perfect science, but they're way better. And it's without at least having those ranges, planning is sort of worthless.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to get to a point where then we can mirror your lifestyle today and transition that into retirement. And so from a spending perspective, that's where we have to go through that budgeting exercise to try and get to that point to say, is this a reasonable spending range for me to keep my lifestyle comfortable for the next 20 to 30 years?
Right.
And again, part of that is then the expertise of your planner that you're working with to know how to get that information from you. So that way you don't have to do it all yourself.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you probably wouldn't want to be sitting here in the first place because you would just do it yourself.
Right.
Most of our clients don't come in with that comprehensive, detailed budget that's 3 Excel tabs long with multiple iterations inside there. Generally, a lot of times we're coming in to try and help folks, explain to them, this is what it looks like, the lifestyle and the range of income you could spend today. And does that match what you have? So it doesn't even have to be someone coming in with an exact plan. That's what we're going to help you leave with at the end of this.
Yeah. I'm thinking of going to all these different things I've used for, whether it's my car, you go to the doctors or whatever, like somebody who's professional and you think, oh, this is going to be a nightmare. And then they're like, oh no, I do this all the time. Boom, boom, boom. And you walk out of there going, oh, that was way better than I thought. That's what we want our clients to be leaving with that same feeling.
That's right. It's about that knowledge is power. So it's not anything that we're forcing someone to have to do. It's about providing them advice about what you should do if you want to put yourself in a better position for success longer term. Because at the end of the day, it impacts your life substantially. Yeah. So for most of the folks we meet, if they are overspending for a 3-year, 5-year, potentially even a 10-year time frame, it may be okay. There's a lot of variables in there that would impact that. But, in terms of a 20 or 30-year time frame, significantly overspending could clearly come back to haunt someone at a point in time in their life of saying, well, now what do I do if I've liquidated my nest egg? Yeah.
Kirk, this was great. I know you're a busy man. I'll let you get back to what you do. Although you are good on camera, like you're very natural to talk to. So I appreciate that. Anything else we missed?
No, I think this is great.
All right. Thank you, brother. Get back.
Sounds good.